This is the theBreaker.news podcast for the week of June 9th, 2024. I'm Bob Mackin, publisher of theBreaker.news and host of the theBreaker.news podcast. Welcome to edition number 346. The Breaker is your source for news, opinion, and analysis about British Columbia issues, institutions, and influencers. Later, I'll tell you how you can support The Breaker. On this edition, headlines from the Pacific Rim and the Pacific Northwest. I award a virtual Nanaimo bar to a difference maker. And on the Big Deal feature, the 111th edition of the Grey Cup is coming to BC Place Stadium in November. The BC Lions are marking their 70th anniversary. Will they win the CFL championship for the 7th time? Hear from CFL Commissioner Randy Ambrosie, who was in Vancouver last week. Who is in the sin bin this week? Justin Trudeau, his Liberal cabinet, Liberal caucus, and Liberal Party. Former Conservative Prime Minister Stephen Harper, why not? Former BC Liberal Premier Christy Clark, I'm looking at you too. It's going to get very crowded in there, but you all deserve gross misconduct penalties for how you put Canada in this spot by playing footsie with foreign regimes for so long. In 2010, CSIS Director Richard Fadden sounded the alarm. China had influence over unnamed municipal politicians in BC and higher-ranking politicians on the national scene. For that, Fadden was called a racist. Fast forward to 2024, and we're in the middle of a public inquiry into how China meddled in the 2019 and 2021 federal elections. Like China, Russia, India, and Iran have also meddled in Canadian government and business and bullied people who moved here to live in a democracy. The National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians does most of its work in secret, and when it issues reports, it censors them. But one thing we now know from its bombshell report last week, that, quote, some parliamentarians are, in the words of the intelligence services, semi-witting or witting participants in the efforts of foreign states to interfere in our politics. End quote. In other words, treason. Treason in Canada. This is the Big Deal feature on the theBreaker.news podcast. It's a big year for three-down football on the West Coast and across the country. CFL Commissioner Randy Ambrosie was in Vancouver on June 3rd and sat down with reporters at Joey Burrard. Ambrosie played 9 years with the Calgary Stampeders, Toronto Argonauts, and Edmonton Eskimos. He wears the Grey Cup ring from 1993's Edmonton win over Winnipeg. He was secretary for the CFL Players Association and held positions at several investment firms before becoming the 14th commissioner in league history in 2017. The Q&A session started with Ambrosie's overview of the state of the league.
One of the things that I would say, sometimes those negative things, you can go either way, right? They get more negative or you use those as a chance to rebound. And I think that governors consciously decided to use COVID. So one of the first things we did is talked about what would our strategy be, what's the go forward plan. And one of the big changes we made was we negotiated the deal with Genius Sports based on a lot of opportunities that they presented to go forward. So it really was the springboard, but really I'd say one of the biggest positives has just been the way it has unified our Board of Governors. And now with Amar Doman here, you got Murray Edwards in Calgary. Edmonton very confident Edmonton will get sold to a private operator. Saskatchewan and Winnipeg, super strong. You've got Hamilton with Bob Young, Scott Mitchell, and Stelco, Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. Then you got Roger Greenberg and John Ruddy in Ottawa and Pierre-Carl Palado. The league has never had owners, literally in our entire history, that have looked like this group. But they have collectively have a resolve to take the league to the next level. And then, you got to speak to what's happened here. It's been special. For those that have watched Amar from the moment he did his initial press conference, the level of authenticity about his commitment to growing the Lions and to Dwayne's commitment to growing the Lions is unmistakable. Last year, TV ratings were up 9% overall, 25 to 54, up 34%. The growth in attendance in my first season, 2017, the only question people would ask me during press conferences, what are you going to do about your major markets? And now, Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal are strengths for the league, and all are showing signs of remarkable growth. And, Amar and Dwayne have really provided a lot of leadership around, kind of resetting the table and thinking big and being creative and trying new things. So it's, it really is a testimony to the Board of Governors and their resolve. Dwayne will know this. Our management council, which is made up of our team presidents, is probably as cohesive and collaborative as we've ever had in the league's history. In 2017, when I got here, we did not share, and the teams did not share financial information with each other. So I said to the governors in conversation, I don't even know how to help you. Like, unless I know what the business really looks like, how can I have an impact? And it was really the beginning of a totally different. Now the teams share everything with each other. Internally, this is an open book to each other, and there's also a sense of, how do you learn from each other's best practices? And it's become a much stronger league as a result. And again, it all begins with a great board of governors that are committed to taking to the next level. So yeah, it is a totally different league than it was back in those days.
CFL Commissioner Randy Ambrosie was asked for the timeline on the appeal of Sean Lemon's indefinite suspension for gambling. The Montreal Alouettes defensive lineman bet in 2021 on a game involving his Calgary Stampeders.
So there's a conversation happening literally right now about booking the arbitrator and booking the arbitration. So that's a process, and it's there's negotiations back and forth with the Players Association on booking that date. So that's been underway now for several days. I am hoping to be able to announce the date for that arbitration very soon. But again, it is a process. So we issue our discipline. They are entitled, as he is, they're entitled to appeal. Once he appeals, he's eligible to participate. So there's a stay of the discipline.
Will there be an appeal of the Chad Kelly situation? The Toronto Argos quarterback was suspended a minimum 9 games for sexually harassing a female strength and conditioning coach.
There have been developments there, but I'm not at liberty to share those with you. Look, our hope is that we use this. And I'll take a step back. So when the policy was originally created, our violence against women policy, ultimately. The people that consulted to us, these were experts in the field. They really, some of the key principles, amongst the key principles, one was accountability, and the second was an opportunity for rehabilitation. And so, look, my deep desire is that we give Chad an opportunity to learn from this experience, to go through a period of and a number of counseling sessions, to go through an assessment, and hopefully come out the other end, better prepared to not just be a great player on the field. We know we can do that, but to be a real positive contributor, not to the Argos, but to Canadians at large. So, look, the process is going to play itself out, but we should know more in the days ahead. I'm more growing optimistic based on what I'm hearing that Chad will go through the program and have an opportunity to really use this as a growth opportunity.
On the rise in sports betting across Canada, Randy Ambrosie was asked how the CFL balances the sponsorship revenue with the integrity of the game. Is there a blurring of lines between the two?
It is not even a whisper blurry. This is 2020 vision. Because ultimately, our policy is absolutely clear. Our education programs are absolutely clear. You cannot. The unforgivable sin is gambling within your own league. That is, but the most unforgivable sin is gambling on a game that you played in, and that is what Our facts are very clear that what happened in this particular case is that athlete bet on a game that he played in. It is simply, you cannot cross that line, and if you do, you have to send a strong message that it's not tolerated. And then I think very positively, what this situation reveals is that if you do it, you're going to get caught. The surveillance systems are so good. And this is what happens when you put some sunlight. Previously, prior to the legalizing of sports wagering, it was all done in out of country, it was done in the shadows. That was much harder to surveil. Now, with the advent of the public systems, I'd say to a player today, if you do it, trust me, you will be found out and caught, and the punishment will be severe. And I'm hoping that's one of the messages that will land with this particular situation is don't do it. Don't do it, because if you do it, you'll get caught. And if you get caught, the resulting discipline will be somewhat unforgiving.
A year ago, Simon Fraser University, the biggest provider of talent to the Canadian Football League, shut down its football team after 58 years. I asked Randy Ambrosie what the status of CFL talks with SFU and U Sports Football are like.
I think ultimately, Simon Fraser needs to decide itself that they want to do something. So we're not involved. I'm not involved in an active conversation, but certainly we are very supportive of more college football, not less. We'd be very supportive of seeing the SFU come back into football. But those are decisions that have to be made, at the university, and they have to want to do it. And we hope that they'll come to that conclusion at some point in the not too distant future. Look, we really want to focus on, let's grow the game. Let's get more kids involved in playing. The more kids that play, the more talent there is to stock the pond. Ultimately, that means more players that will want to play college football. Look, I think our bigger, broader mandate is grow participation in the game. It's such a great game for kids to play. It gives them a chance to participate in a team. Yeah, boys and girls can play flag. It's a tremendous way to get started in the game of football. So our biggest focus is on participation at this stage. Get as many kids playing football as we can, and hopefully that'll spur on bigger opportunities down the road.
2 years from now, the World Cup is happening in Toronto and Vancouver CFL stadiums. What is the CFL going to do to try to work around that?
We have the beginnings of a project plan for how we're going to manage through the World Cup, and it's a little early to be specifically planning for it now, but it's one of those items that's on a list that we'll likely start talking about in January and February of 2025, and how do we plan for it, how do we make it work. And again, the more we do to grow our game, the more we do to build our fandom, ultimately as we move our games around to suit other schedules, our fans will follow us. Look what's happening in Victoria. You take a game there and you sell it out, you add more seats and you sell it out. I think we can make little adjustments and actually build momentum rather than lose momentum.
That was CFL Commissioner Randy Ambrosie, and here are some dates to circle on your calendar for 2024. Touchdown Pacific in Victoria is August 31st. The 70th anniversary celebration game is September 13th at BC Place, and BC Place is also host of the 111th Grey Cup on November 17th. It's time on the theBreaker.news podcast for Around the Rim. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Rim. In the Taiwan news, Taiwan Army to end bayonet training and goose step march. Defense Minister says they are not useful for modern close quarters combat. Defense Minister Wellington Koo made his first appearance as Defense Minister at the Foreign and National Defense Committee of the Legislative Yuan on June 6th to present his first report and field questions. In Kyoto news, Toyota, Mazda halt production of 5 models amid certification scandal. The pause will affect about 200 suppliers who directly provide parts to Toyota, but the figure tops 1,000 when including subcontractors, the carmaker said. Mazda said it buys parts directly from about 300 suppliers. The two automakers said they are considering compensating businesses for the losses they will incur. In the Hong Kong Free Press, Beijing condemns political theatrics of foreign consulates in Hong Kong on Tiananmen crackdown anniversary. On the 35th anniversary of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre, diplomats were seen walking outside Victoria Park, where the city's annual commemorative vigils used to be held, followed by throngs of press. That's Around the Rim on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast. Now it's time on the Breaker.news podcast for Cascadia Calling. We look at news headlines around the Pacific Northwest. In Willamette Week, Gonzalez objects to county's plan to fund more tents, tarps, and syringes. City Commissioner Renee Gonzalez wrote to County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson. Gonzalez, who is running for mayor, says he hears regularly from Portlanders who say they do not feel safe bringing their families to parks for fear of stepping on used needles. The budget proposes distribution of 5 million syringes from the health department, a 49% increase. In Crosscut, young Washingtonians talk about why they may not vote in 2024, but fellow university students are working to get them excited about the democratic process and engaged with local elections. Young voters motivated by issues like climate change, racial injustice, and the COVID-19 pandemic voted in record numbers in 2020. More than half of registered voters aged 18 to 29 turned in a ballot, according to several political advocacy groups. This year, for a number of reasons, young people have expressed their reluctance to vote in a rematch between the same two candidates, both white, over 75, and male. In the Breaker.news, Judge strikes province from Free Speech Club's lawsuit over UBC cancellation of Antifa critics' lecture. BC Supreme Court Justice Christopher Greenwood ruled that neither the province nor any of its employees had any direct involvement in the cancellation of author Andy Ngo's 2020 appearance at the Robson Square campus, and, he said, the plaintiffs cannot succeed against the province based on the facts or the law. Greenwood said the Free Speech Club faces headwinds in alleging UBC violated the Constitution. He pointed to court decisions that say universities are not equivalent to the province because they enjoy autonomy. Meanwhile, an anti-Israel protest camp continues on the Poitras campus for a second month. That's Cascadia Calling on this edition of the Breaker.news podcast.
Don't matter what color you are, 'cause love will conquer hate, so you won't stand alone. You won't stand alone.
The virtual Nanaimo Bar, brought to you by Spruce Hill Contracting. Every week we end the Breaker.news podcast on a tasty note by awarding the goodness of a virtual Nanaimo Bar to people making a difference. A virtual version of the province's favorite dessert bar goes this week to scientists, doctors, nurses, paramedics, and caregivers working to prevent and reduce brain injuries and increase rehabilitation for survivors. June is Brain Injury Awareness Month in British Columbia. You can nominate someone for a virtual Nanaimo Bar. Send me an email to bob@theBreaker.news. Spruce Hill Contracting, custom homes and renovations. Find more information at sprucehill.ca. That's it for the Breaker.news podcast for the week of June 9th, 2024. I'm Bob Mackin. Thanks for joining me. Did you know that on the 9th of June in 1999, a peace treaty in the Kosovo War, the day Yugoslavia and NATO agreed to end 15 months of fighting, an estimated 10,000 people died and 1.5 million people were displaced? Now you know. Send me your feedback. Send me your story ideas to bob@theBreaker.news. Bookmark theBreaker.news. You can also find us at theBreaker.ca. Sign up for the email newsletter and get updates to your inbox, or follow The Breaker News for news as it happens on X, formerly Twitter. You can support The Breaker for as little as $2 a month. For more information, go to patreon.com/TheBreakerNews. That's patreon.com/TheBreakerNews. Until next week.